What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Pack a Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. And of course, make sure to subscribe if you have not already. I could not be more excited about today's episode because I really want to go over this topic because I think it's really important to go over prior to the NFL draft. There are a lot of tight ends that a lot of people are very excited about and think that Green Bay could possibly select in the first round. In fact, the last 3 episodes that I've done here on the Pack a Day Podcast have highlighted 4 of those tight ends, including Darnell Washington, Dalton Kincaid, Luke Musgrave, and Michael Mayer. So I've just gone over the 4 top tight ends, at least in most people's boards, the top 4 tight ends in this draft, and the players that could potentially be in consideration at that position in the first round. And maybe, just maybe, Green Bay would consider them. And like I said, I know some people are hoping that some of these tight ends may end up in Green Bay in round 1 and are totally okay with that. And I'm here to tell you, you probably should not be hoping that. Now, I want to say a couple things. We're very well versed at this point of like, hey, don't take running backs in round 1. That is probably a bad idea. There's always exceptions to the rule. Maybe there shouldn't be, but we're well versed in that. I think it's time to start getting to the point of, hey, don't take tight ends in round 1 either. It is also a very bad idea, and today is going to be detailing why. Now, a couple things, as I mentioned. The first is that, and I want to reiterate this, I very much do like the top tight ends in this class. The top 4, and even, Sam Laporta, wherever you want to put him in the group, I might get a full breakdown on him at some point as well. Like, I really enjoy the top tight ends in this class. And go back and listen to the last 3 episodes where I detail the full scouting report for the top 4 guys. And there is a lot to like about these players. So this is not a referendum on those specific players. I think all of them can be really, really good. But that isn't necessarily the point as we go over this today. Additionally, Green Bay really needs a tight end. Jordan Love really needs a tight end. The Packers' red zone offense really needs a red zone threat. Tight end, goes without saying, is a massive need for this team. It's a very interesting draft, meaning this is not as strong of a draft as I would normally, sort of grade out the entirety of a potential first round, meaning that you could get to a point where, you know what? It's just not that deep of a draft, so we're just going to take best player available, and that could potentially be a tight end. There's a world in which that scenario exists. So at some point, you just have to put everything together, go over the risk, the reward, the players, the scouting reports, and everything, and just take the best player on your board. And it's possible, especially in this draft, where some of the better players do seem to kind of be tight ends, that could ultimately just happen based on the draft, how it takes place, which players come off the board, and who's ultimately left. So sometimes that can just happen. And I'll say it one more time, I do really like the tight ends in this class. So it is nothing against them. And if you like them, I get it. I understand why. There's a lot to like about this group. Additionally, one other thing I will say here is that if you can find that needle in the haystack, if you can find the Travis Kelce, if you can find the Gronk, to a maybe slightly lesser extent, if you can find the George Kittle, those are potentially franchise-altering players who are going to change the state of your franchise, who are going to change the state of your offense at minimum, and are going to give you so much of a better chance to be a high-end team because it is so hard to find those players, and they are matchup nightmares for teams. I don't need to tell you the importance of Gronk with Tom Brady. Now, clearly, a part of Gronk's success was also due to Tom Brady. A part of Kelce's success was also due to Patrick Mahomes. We can't say the same thing for George Kittle with the quarterbacks that he has had, but part of that has been the play of those quarterbacks. But a huge part of those quarterback successes has also been Rob Gronkowski, Travis Kelce, and clearly George Kittle has been a huge part of that San Francisco Kyle Shanahan offense that's been very successful, even though they haven't won, that elusive Super Bowl as of late. So it is, if you can find them, by all means, if you take a tight end and you get it right and you get that type of player, bravo, because that can be, like I said, a franchise-altering move. So if you can get them, by all means do it, but just know it is very, very hard to find those players. And note, Travis Kelce, Rob Gronkowski, George Kittle, none of them happen to be former first round picks. They were all taken later in the draft. We could go Antonio Gates. We could go through a lot of tight ends, Shannon Sharp, and the vast majority of them were not, the top tight ends were not first round picks. One of the few that was actually Tony Gonzalez, but that's neither here nor there. We're going to be going over the more recent tight ends and the more recent tight end drafting history. Now, going back all the way to the wonderful Bubba Franks when he was drafted by Green Bay, there have been 24 first-round tight ends. And I want to read those 24 first-round tight ends to you right now, which is always great podcast material, but I'm going to do it nonetheless because I think it's important. Kyle Pitts, the most recent one, Noah Fant, TJ Hawkinson, Hayden Hurst, David Njoku, Evan Ingram, OJ Howard, Eric Ebron, Tyler Eifert, Jermaine Gresham, Brandon Pettigrew, Dustin Keller, Mercedes Lewis, Vernon Davis, Heath Miller, Ben Watson, Kellen Winslow Jr., Dallas Clark, Daniel Graham, Jeremy Shockey, Jeremy Stevens, Todd Heap, Anthony Becht, and then Bubba Franks. Those were the last 24 first-round tight ends. Maybe those didn't exactly jump off the page to you. Certainly some good ones in there. Dallas Clark comes to mind immediately. Jeremy Shockey had some really good seasons. That being said, those 24 first-round tight ends, I'm not just cherry picking. These are the last 24 first-round tight ends going back to Bubba Franks. The 24 first-round tight ends have 24 combined Pro Bowl selections. And it should be worth noting here that when you are a first-round pick, specifically at a position like this, a lot of times you get a little bit extra Pro Bowl favor. You know, fans and teams know you a little bit more. You get a little bit more, you get more favor when players, teams, coaches and fans specifically are voting for the Pro Bowl. So that can affect those sort of things very much. And of all 24, you have 24 Pro Bowl selections. Throw that away. By the way, Jeremy Shockey, of all of them, led the way with 4 Pro Bowl selections. All right, so 4 total was the highest with Jeremy Shockey. Bubba Franks, by the way, had 3 of them. You may not have expected that, but he had 3 of the 24 Pro Bowl selections, which just goes to show you, Bubba Franks, nice player, but not exactly a high-end tight end player that brought tons of value to Green Bay. Nice player, but that was like one of the better tight end selections of the past 24 first-round picks. Meanwhile, the bigger one that I want to say here, 2 combined all-pro selections from these 24 first-round tight ends. The last 20, let me say that one more time. The last 24 first-round tight ends, the tight ends drafted in the first round, have a combined 2 all-pro selections. And that is Dallas Clark with 1 and Jeremy Shockey with 1. And that was a while back, by the way, if we're going back to Dallas Clark and Jeremy Shockey. So if you're looking for high-end contributors at the tight end position, the first round of the draft has not been where you have ultimately found those players. Just for fun comparison's sake, it has nothing to do with the player or the position or anything, but just for funsies, Micah Parsons, in his last 2 seasons, has 2 all-pro selections. The last 24 first-round tight ends combined have 2 all-pro selections. So it has not been exactly a treasure trove of success when you have taken a first-round tight end. And like I said, read through those names. And we don't know what's going to happen with Kyle Pitts yet. That's fair to say. TJ Hawkinson may have a rebirth in Minnesota, and he could be a very good tight end for them. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. But overall, if Dallas Clark and Jeremy Shockey are your 2 best examples out of those 24 tight ends, Todd Heap had a nice career in Baltimore, but he wasn't exactly this massive game changer. That's just not good enough. Teams have not done a good job identifying tight ends, college tight ends, that can come in and be high-end players in the NFL. And let me be very, very clear. If you are taking a player in the first round of the draft, that is your time to go big game hunting. You can find good players at a variety of different layers of the draft, even in sometimes undrafted free agency. You can find replacement level players. In your first round, you better be going big game hunting. That's something that Green Bay has done a fairly good job at, especially in the Brian Gutekunst era. Jair Alexander, premium position, went big game hunting, hit pretty darn big with that pick. Rashawn Gary, you can say the same thing. Jordan Love, undetermined, but they went big game hunting with that pick. You can hate the pick. I understand why at that time you may have hated that pick, but he went big game hunting, high risk, high reward. All right, you can go, further on, and Eric Stokes, first round pick, premium position, went big game hunting there. And then this past year, you can argue Quay Walker wasn't a premium position, so maybe not quite as much, but certainly Devontae Wyatt, high end athleticism, Georgia, SEC school, premium position. Like, you look at what they look at, they go generally big game hunting. And so far, over the last almost 25 years, those tight ends have not paid off those dividends. It has not been a position to go big game hunting with. And I will add on to that, of those 24, and again, maybe Hawkinson or Pitts can get into this conversation, so I wouldn't eliminate them totally yet. Every other one I would. Only two All-Pros, but more importantly, no Hall of Fame caliber players. So you haven't been getting these high-end players that are going to be your franchise-altering players. So that has been a pretty big indictment over the recent stages of first-round tight ends. It just hasn't gone very, very well. Additionally, if you're looking for, all right, you know what? Pro Bowls, All-Pros, etc., that stuff's great, but you know what? Just go out and get a really good tight end. Get a guy that's going to help you for a decade. That shouldn't be that hard, right? Of the last 8 first-round tight ends, and again, Kyle Pitts here could maybe be a second one here, but of the last 8 first-round tight ends, only David Njoku has made it with the same team past 5 years. You might say, well, some of those guys haven't had a chance. Well, that's not true. Hayden Hurst, TJ Hawkinson, Noah Fant, those guys have been traded and have moved on already. So the only player in the last of the last 8 tight ends, the last 8 first-round tight ends, besides David Njoku, who could make it past 5 years, is Kyle Pitts. It has not been a recent position where players have stayed with their current team. And a large part of that is because the learning curve at the tight end position. When you're drafting a first-round tight end or just any tight end, there usually is a very steep learning curve at that position. The reason being is you have to know how to learn to be a route runner, almost like a wide receiver. You have to learn how to release off the line of scrimmage. You have to learn how to, just the nuances of route running, expand your route tree. You have to all of it. All of it matters. How to use leverage, how to use your eyes, how to use your hands, just everything. The same thing wide receivers do. And at the same token, if you're an inline tight end, now if you're just a receiving tight end, you're not going to learn as much about the blocking aspect of it. But even those guys learn some of it. But if you're a true inline tight end, you also have to learn the blitz pickups, the run blocking, the nuances of blocking. There is a ton that goes into that. So you're getting everything thrown at you. You're trying to put on more functional strength so you can hold up in the NFL against those players. You're trying to learn how to be a NFL caliber receiver. You're trying to learn how to become an NFL caliber blocker. And that is a ton to take in. And because of that, you're seeing these guys develop later. And you know when it starts to generally click for them around the time that they need to get a second contract. And that becomes very difficult for the first team, the team that drafted them, because they're saying, we just put a first round pick into this guy. And yeah, we already paid him, through those first 4 years, and we developed him. And maybe he's showed some signs at the end, but now we have to give him this huge contract. I think we'll go in a different direction. And we see that all the time. So Mike Gesicki, who again is not an all around tight end at this point, but Dalton Schultz, the Cowboys, you get to that point where they're just starting to develop and showing some signs, and now the team doesn't want to pay them because they didn't see the ROI on that first contract. And a lot of times the second team gets them, and that's when you start to see some of these breakouts, is when they get to their second team or when they get to year 5, year 6, etc. So that is part of the issue as well, is the learning curve is so incredibly steep. And by the time you get to that time to give him a second contract, you're just not sure yet if it's worth it to actually give him that contract, which becomes a problem. Meanwhile, let's look at 2022 at the tight end position. Just this past season, the most recent season, there were 3 tight ends only who had an 80 plus grade by PFF. Only 3. Mark Andrews, barely, with an 80.7, George Kittle with an 84.7, and Travis Kelce with a 91.3. Meaning, Regardless of where these guys were drafted, it is just extremely difficult to find high-end players. And again, I will reiterate this one more time. When you are drafting in the first round, you should be looking for huge ROI. You should be looking for extremely high-end players who are not only going to be a big-time player, but are going to potentially be a franchise-altering player for you. And note, once again, Mark Andrews, George Kittle, Travis Kelce, none of them were first-round picks. And again, no matter where it is, it's just very difficult to find them. And all three of them, again, were found on later stages of the draft. The next best tight end was Dallas Goedert at 78.2, also not a first round tight end. And again, like if you're just playing the percentages here, or if you're going to take a tight end at pick 15, for example, like in order to like really pay that pick off, you're probably hoping that they can be a player that grades consistently in the 80s or better. There were only 3 of those in the entire NFL last year. If not, you have a good player. Let's just even take like a Dallas Goedert. All right, that's a great example. If like let's say you go out and you draft the next Dallas Goedert, that's a nice pick. Like you're probably saying I'm not going to be upset about that. If you could say right now that Green Bay drafts Dalton Kincaid and he becomes the next Dallas Goedert. Like, okay, that's not so bad. They've had Justin Harrells and they've had far worse draft picks than the next Dallas Goedert. But how much? Just really think about this for a second. I know Philly's done really well in recent seasons, and I know they won a Super Bowl, not too long ago. I believe Goddard was on that team as behind Ertz, if memory serves. I could be a year off there, but in this past season, he was their number 1 tight end in a Super Bowl run, even though they didn't win it. That's an important position. Where on Philly's like charts on either of those seasons does Dallas Goedert come into play? Because I would put almost all of their edge rushers. I would put Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, Darius Slay. I think the linebackers are at least in the conversation. You've got a variety of defense, like a Fletcher Cox, probably more important. You've got Lane Johnson. You've got Jordan Mailata. You've got Jason Kelce. You've got Jalen Hurts. Like you've got Devontae Smith, AJ Brown. Like you probably, as far as importance for like who's most important on that team, like you might be like 15, 16 players down on Philly's roster before you get to how important Dallas Goedert was to that team. So like nice player, but he's like, nobody is making the argument of like, man, Dallas Goedert was the guy that really got Philly going. Like he was the one that put them over the, like that's the guy that opposing teams were worried about. Like you just can't stop Dallas Goedert. He's a really nice player. Like I said, you might not even be that upset if Dallas Goedert is, if you get a Dallas Goedert-esque player at pick 15. But I just want to be clear, like how hard is it? How hard is it for Green Bay? You hit on a Rashawn Gary and a Jair Alexander in that range of the draft, right? Pick 12, pick 18 for Jair, if memory serves. Like you hit on those players. Those are high-end premium players at premium positions. And those two combined couldn't get Green Bay's defense over the top to be a top 10 defense. And you hit huge home runs with those 2 picks. Are you going to say that, like, if you get a good tight end, that's going to be the thing that turns around your offense or makes your offense that much better, that's just going to make you an unstoppable team? It is very hard to be a player and find a player at any position, certainly. But like if you're searching for a player at that stage of the draft, you are hoping that this player is going to potentially be a generational player, is potentially going to be a Hall of Fame caliber player, at least an All-Pro or Pro Bowl caliber player. You are hoping that this is going to be somebody that's going to change your franchise. There's no guarantee that it will, no matter what position you pick, no matter what player you pick, no matter like none of it, right? It's all some sort of crapshoot, lottery ticket, whatever you want to call it. There is certainly some skill that goes into scouting, but there is a lot of luck. There's a lot of projection. And if you just watch the history of the draft, you will know that there's no exact science to this. But what you're hoping is that the ROI has the potential to be extremely high when you're picking at that point in the draft. And there is a limit, especially at the tight end position, as to just how big of a player that you can get when you're selecting at that spot. And recent history would show, for example, the last 24 first-round tight ends, that you might get some good players, but very few of those, if any of the last 24 tight ends were actually franchise altering, Super Bowl altering picks. Some of those guys won Super Bowls. Ben Watson, Daniel Graham, I think Shockey won one or two, but like none of those guys were the guy. Dallas Clark won one. None of those guys were the guy. None of those guys were like, that's the reason you won a Super Bowl. And that's what you're searching for when you're picking at this level of the draft. And it just shows, as of recently, again, your Mark Andrews, your George Kittle, your Travis Kelce, if you can find those guys, that's good. That's a good thing to have. Drafting good players is good, but it's really difficult to find those players at that position, at that spot in the NFL draft. History has shown that. And I want to add on to this by talking about two of the more recent first round picks, specifically Kyle Pitts and TJ Hawkinson. Both of them, in my opinion, were two of the best tight ends that I had ever seen come out of college, meaning from a scouting standpoint. I'm not saying either of them, like especially Hawkinson. It's not like he was putting up, 2,000 yards a season or anything crazy, but like they were both phenomenal prospects. Hawkinson had everything. He could block, he could catch, came out of Iowa, which has been tight end U. Like he showed everything on tape that you could possibly want a tight end to show. And he's been good. He's been fine. Detroit traded him away for pennies on the dollar, what was the equivalent of a third round pick. And because he's been a fine tight end. And Minnesota, I'm sure, is fine with the trade that they did, but certainly did not put Minnesota over the top this past season. He's a good player. I like TJ Hawkinson. Like you could argue that Green Bay should have maybe tried to do that same deal. Maybe Detroit wouldn't have sent him to Green Bay, although they sent him to Minnesota. So I would think that they would have. But I don't know, if that's the best you're getting out of one of the best tight end scouting tapes that you could possibly see is what you're going to get a third round pick in return. And he's a fine tight end. And Kyle Pitts, the jury is still out. He's had some really good seasons already. Like his rookie season was really good, and he's already had a Pro Bowl selection, and he's had really bad quarterbacks. They haven't used him right. There's a lot going on there. I think Kyle Pitts has a really good chance to be a really good tight end. But even Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks on Move the Sticks said something very similar, that they were talking, I think, to like a league executive or someone who's like, man, if Hawkinson and Pitts aren't like completely changing the way that your offense is working, if they're not like complete game changers, like what are we doing drafting tight ends in the first round? And it's true. Like if those are the best guys that you're finding on tape over the last decade plus is Hawkinson and Pitts. And Hawkinson's been okay, fine, good. And Pitts is like, even though I think all of those things are true, had been banged up, not in the right offense, not with the right quarterback, and he's still been pretty good, I still would argue that he hasn't lived up to the number 4 overall pick in the draft. And that's a hard thing for anyone to do, but I would certainly still argue that. And if those guys can't, then like what are we doing taking early tight ends? And I agree with that assessment. And I'll add on to that by saying, if you look at the NFL right now, in the current state of the tight end position, what tight ends right now in the NFL would you trade the 15th pick for? I think there's 5 names that could potentially come to mind. Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Mark Andrews, Dallas Goedert, and Kyle Pitts. I think those are the 5 names. And if you're saying TJ Hawkinson, he literally just went for a third round pick a season ago, like the equivalent of a third round pick. It was 2 pick swaps. That was the equivalent of a third round pick. So you can't put it, logically, you can't put him in the conversation because he just got traded for far less. So then there's 5 names: Kelce, Kittle, Andrews, Goddard, and Pitts. Let's just say you would trade the number 15 pick for all 5 of them. I don't think that's smart, and I'll get on to why in just a moment. But let's say you would. Even if those are the only 5, even if at best case you would do all of those 5, I don't think there's anyone else that you could possibly make an argument for that you would trade the number 15 pick for at the tight end position. Even if that's the case, if those are the 5 most valuable tight ends, if you're taking a guy right now at pick 15, you better be sure that he is the 6th best your most valued tight end in the league. It's as simple as that. Because there's nobody else you would trade pick 15 for. If those are the 5 guys that you would, then this has to be the 6th most valuable tight end in the league right now. That is a tough sell. And maybe you get it right. Maybe he's better. But even more so, here's the thing. Travis Kelce, with his age and his contract, I think you can make an argument. Some teams would be smart to trade a first for Travis Kelce if they're ready to compete for a Super Bowl. Green Bay is not. With his contract and his age, it would not be a smart deal for Green Bay. George Kittle is 30 and has a high-end contract. You could make an argument, maybe it's worth it. I would say probably with being over 30 and where his contract's at, he's had some injury issues as of late. I probably wouldn't trade pick 15 with where Green Bay is at right now. Other teams, it would make sense for. So I want to be clear. Some teams, Kelce and Kittle, I think trading a first could be smart business for. I do not think Green Bay is one of those teams. Mark Andrews, he's 28. He's got 3 years, $30 million left on his deal. That's not bad. I get him for 3 years. He's still probably going to be pretty good, but 28, you're getting into the 29, 30 year ages. Like there's a lot of wear and tear on tight ends' bodies. 10 mil a year, not bad. I think you could make an argument for that. Probably wouldn't do it, but I could understand if you wanted to. Dallas Goedert, 28 years old, 3 years, $36 million left after a trade on his deal. Again, you're getting a okay player, but again, he's 28, 12 mil per year. You're not getting him on a rookie deal. I would not do that. And then Kyle Pitts, you could make a strong argument for. I think in the right offense, with the right quarterback, he's 23 years old. He's already made a Pro Bowl. He's had a 1,000-yard season already. He's got 2 years, $9 million left on his deal after a trade. He'd have a 5th-year option that you would have the ability to pick up. That is probably the one that even for Green Bay, you could make a strong argument. That's the guy that you would. So I don't think I would do an Andrews. I don't think I would do a Goddard. Andrews is certainly in the conversation. But all right, let's just say you're a team that's willing to trade for Kelce, Kittle, maybe Pitts, maybe Andrews. Again, maybe there's 2, 3, 4 guys. But then your guy that you take at 15 has to immediately fill that next spot. That's what you're valuing him at. And that is, again, a tough pill to swallow, especially when we've seen the recent history of tight end picks. It hasn't worked out very well. The other thing I will say, and this is one thing I haven't gone over before, but the player picked at pick 15 will get a 4-year, $17 million deal with a 5th-year option. All right, so you're averaging about 4.5-ish or 4.25, somewhere around there, mil per season for this player at tight end. It's worth noting that Mike Gesicki, who is far from a perfect tight end, I get that. He's a receiving tight end only, and he hasn't even been perfect in that role. But Mike Gesicki, who I think some people, certainly going into this offseason would have been pretty darn excited if Green Bay would have gotten in on that conversation and signed a Mike Gesicki. He signed for 1 year, 4.5 mil. Even like one of your top free agents. Look at some of the other ones. Dalton Schultz was 1 year, $6 million. Josh Oliver was the next the highest, basically. Oh, sorry, Oliver and Hayden Hurst. Oliver was 3 years, $21 million. Hayden Hurst was 3 years, $21.7 mil. For around, and it's not like this was the greatest tight end free agent class ever, but for around 7 mil a season, or maybe even 4.5 with Mike Gesicki, you can get a pretty good tight end. And let's just take Dalton Schultz. I want to take Dalton Schultz as an example here. For 1 year, $6 million, you can get a Dalton Schultz. And you could use some void years so it's less this upcoming season. So let me ask you this. Would you rather take a flyer on a Dalton Schultz or a Mike Gesicki for 1 year? And if I had to bet, if you took the top 5 tight ends in this draft, my guess is the average of those careers averaged out through the next 10 years would be about, what Dalton Schultz is going to give you. That would be my guess. So would you rather do a 1 year, $6 million deal for Dalton Schultz and have a pick 15 in the draft to spend at another position? Or would you rather spend a first round pick 15 overall on a Dalton Kincaid, a Darnell Washington, whoever, put whatever, Luke Musgrave, etc., who maybe ends up being Dalton Schultz? You take the contract for Gesicki or Schultz, play them now, go out and pick a premium position in the first round, and then take tight end later and develop that player and hope that you hit the next guy at some other point in the draft that you're not spending a premium draft pick for, which has been more the formula for success as we have seen. The other thing here is if we're looking at potential contract value, again, for example, Hayden Hurst was your highest paid free agent tight end. You could put Evan Ingram on the franchise tag on there if you want, but even still, Derek Carr at quarterback, not even a good quarterback, 37.5 mil average per season. Javon Hargrave, 21 mil per season. Jawan Taylor, 20 mil per season. Tremaine Edmonds, not even a premium position, 18 mil per season. Mike McGlinchey, 17.5 mil per season. Draymond Jones, 17.1 million per season in free agency. The point being is that you take premium positions at this point in the draft because it is really hard to find a good quarterback, offensive tackle, wide receiver, defensive lineman, edge rusher, corner. Those guys are extremely hard to find in free agency. And if you do need to find a really good one, you're paying $20 million or more per season. If you need a tight end, you could go get a Mike Gesicki for 1 year's $4.5 million. You could go get a Dalton Schultz for 1 year, $6 million. Those guys are out there. You could get a Hayden Hurst, who I'm less excited about, but 3 years, $21.7 million. You can find a serviceable tight end in free agency to fill a spot and go out and get a premium pick with your actual draft pick. That is potentially going to pay far more dividends because the value for those players is far higher. The ROI is far higher for premium position players than it is for a player like tight end. The other thing here is that tight end is allegedly and supposedly, and what I see as one of the deepest positions in this draft. So why are you spending a first round pick on a tight end when it's one of the deepest positions in the draft? And again, the ROI, the value, the history, all of it has not been there with drafting a first round tight end. You can make that argument as well. And I'll sort of end with this. It should be noted that Green Bay values age, premium position, and athleticism in the first round of the draft. Really, the only age one that they've gone out of their thresholds with Brian Gutekunst has been Devontae Wyatt this past season. They've stuck with their athletic thresholds in the first round with every pick, and they've gone premium position with every pick except for Quay Walker this past year. So the odds that they take, especially one of the overage tight ends like a Musgrave or a Hayden Hurst, or excuse me, Dalton Kincaid, is very, very slim. The odds that they take a non-premium position is probably very slim. And the odds that they take a non-extreme athlete like a Michael Mayer is probably very slim. Now, there is one tight end that if they did go in that direction, that does fit what I think that they ultimately would be looking for here. SEC school, which we know they value. Georgia, which we know they very much value. Non-premium position, which is still tough, but fits their mold, fits with the scheme, fits the athleticism, fits the age. That's Darnell Washington. And I will say this, Cheesehead TV Draft Guide, Paul Noonian put out a really nice article on how to find really good tight ends. I highly recommend checking it out. I won't give away the results there, but you'll want to check that out for a couple of good reasons as to why Darnell Washington might be the name that if they are going to hit on somebody, that could be worth taking a flyer on. I'll close with this, just kind of recapping everything that we went over. Green Bay desperately needs a tight end. I totally get that. And I genuinely really like the top tight ends in this draft, and I'm incredibly intrigued to see where they ultimately go. This is not a super strong draft. So if there is a time that you maybe need to go outside of a premium position player just because the guys aren't there that you wanted, then maybe this is ultimately the draft to do so. When you have to marry the potential need of tight end with not a great draft, with some of the best players potentially in this draft being tight ends, you might need to go a little bit outside of the circle or outside of your preferences to take just a good player. That might ultimately end up being the case. I don't think it's going to be based on what Green Bay usually likes to do, but that could be the case in a little bit of a weaker draft. If that is the case, I would very, very much expect Green Bay to trade down and get a later first round pick and then select their tight end rather than taking them at pick 15. But all the things we said, developing tight ends is incredibly hard. By the time they get good, they're a free agent. The really, really great tight ends are extremely rare, and over recent history, they have not been selected in the first round. The best ROI is not at tight end, it's at premium position players. The last 24 tight ends selected, the ROI has been minimal on those players, only 2 all-pro seasons combined on those 24. You can get a Dalton Schultz or a Mike Gesicki for a cheap contract, fill in that tight end spot. You could have, can't anymore, obviously, but usually you can get a nice tight end in free agency at a decent price. Whereas if you need other premium position players, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. So you better be trying to get those premium position players when you have the ability to take them at pick 15. It's one of the deepest positions in the draft. So why are you aggressive at the top of the first round at pick 15? And if there is one tight end that I think Green Bay could be interested in, I think it's Darnell Washington. but I do not expect them to go in that direction. And if they do, if you told me they took a tight end round 1, would very much expect them to trade down in round 1 rather than take them at pick 15. I like the tight ends in this draft. They're really fun. They're really exciting. And like I said, if ultimately Green Bay ends up with one of them, especially by trading down, I'm not going to be upset because I think they're good players. But I don't think it's the best philosophy to do. And I don't think it's the best way to use a premium selection, especially when you have a top 15 pick in the draft. Hope you enjoyed this episode. I know it's a little bit of a nerdy deep dive at a position that's not super sexy, but I think it's important given the state of this draft and the top tight ends in this draft and the need at tight end that Green Bay has in this draft. Thanks so much for joining me. I will be right back here tomorrow. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.